Oh, there we go.
Yeah, Michael, that was actually a good reminder because the full discovery days are not supposed to be available. It's just we took September off, and so we made prior ones available for some of the people that didn't want to wait until October. So those will be going private. I will leave them up another 24 hours, but those discovery days, I mean they're really detailed, and they really are what I would consider our quote unquote secret sauce. So in any case, guys, thanks for being patient with me. I just got back from Kansas City. I was visiting one of our franchisees, and we did a site visit. And we're super excited about it. And so I was just wrapping up some emails and a letter of intent to take that land that we visited. So it's I just wanted to make sure I got that out first thing this morning. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Portland, Maine. My background is in finance from an education standpoint. I started off in banking, retail banking at TD Bank, brokerage at TD Ameritrade, and then asset management at Merrill Lynch, and lastly, T. Rowe Price before I started doing this. I'd always been entrepreneurial, and I've always wanted to build a business, and I was pretty deeply invested in my career in finance. So it was important for me to make sure I maintain that for my then girlfriend's parents, now in-laws sake, but as well as, that investment into my education. So I felt obligated to continue that career. And so I looked at businesses that I thought I could run simultaneously while moving up in my career in finance. And I wanted to look at businesses that I considered manager centric, but not skilled manager centric, meaning that it didn't require a specific talent to keep continuity of the business. And so I looked at a lot of different businesses where if the manager called off or got sick, then, I didn't want it to be a situation where the owner had to go in or close. Like that wasn't options that were appealing to me. So I looked at different spaces. I thought the quick lube space was interesting because the manager does have typically 2 days off a week. And when that happens, there's still continuity of the store. Typically the full timer and the part timer run the store if it's a single store operation. And so started looking on Biz Buy Sell to see if there was any available, and one came available in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I thought to myself, this was a good opportunity because I felt as though the industry had some credibility issues, and I thought there was some space to add value there. And so took over that store in Harrisburg, and took me about 6 months to quit my job at T. Rowe Price and do it full time. I was just having too much fun running the business and building the brand. And I really had some ideas about how to make things better in the industry, at least at the time in my little bubble, my little Harrisburg bubble. I wasn't, thinking of this at that time, but so I opened a second store in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania to try and validate the model. Town of 6,000 people, small town. And a lot of what I did while I was still at T. Rowe Price, I sat at my desk and I was looking at Yelp reviews because at the time Yelp was still a relevant platform, and I just reverse engineered what people were saying about some of the players on top. And it was interesting because the feedback was almost unanimous. And so it seemed pretty obvious. And so I implemented my ideas, and we had success at Harrisburg and then Dillsburg. And then our third store was in Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is about 8 to 10 hour drive away from where I live. So very early on in the DNA of our business was embedded that absentee model and third-party resources and third-party applications and, standard operating procedures to make sure that the store was run because I couldn't be there. And so there had to be things in place to account for any situation. And so on and so forth. We opened several stores in different markets, and kind of went across the Western PA, Eastern Ohio, all across to Illinois. And we got to the point where we had 10 locations. And then I thought to myself, we could really do something special in this industry if we franchise, because opening corporate stores is fine. It's very capital intensive and it's a slower process, and franchising was the best opportunity I felt to make an impact on the industry. And so we've done a good job of selling franchises. I think the model resonates with people. Everyone seems to have their own oil change story that makes the brand seem relatable. And so we've had a lot of success. We've sold a lot of units, a lot of territories, and we have a great group of people, and we have, you know, stores opening up what seems like every other week these days. And so we're having a lot of fun, you know, building this brand up. And I think we are going to change the industry for the better. So that's a pretty abbreviated version of the backstory. There's obviously a lot more nuance and detail than that, but I do think Q&A is the best way to uncover some of the more important questions about the industry. And so we used to call this the founders call, and it was specifically about franchising, but then I changed the name of it because I specifically wanted to talk about the industry in general, and also, you know, get those Q&A going, because it does, you know, create really interesting conversations that help me, even if, you know, most people that come through these calls, you know, don't buy franchises, but it still helps us build the brand and think about these things because of those different regions that people come from and the different experiences. And we had a Mac Tools franchisee on the call, and we actually had a guy who owned an independent Quick Lube that was thinking about in Mesa, Arizona, thinking about converting it to our brand. And Michael, actually, I want to talk to you about that gentleman that was on the call a couple weeks ago after this. But in any case, I want to open it up to Q&A. I'll let Michael curate that, and we try not to make the questions be pointed, because that's what Discovery Day is for. So we want to keep it as macro as possible. But if you do have a question that's burning, I'm sure I'll surely answer it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Costa. I'll just move left to right on my screen. Frank, you come up first. Do you have a question?
My only question is, I've been in automotive space for a very long time, and I'm probably a lot closer to 100 than you are, Costa. And my biggest concern is 2 bays is not enough. Is there options for more? And I just based it on my current experience and market.
Well, Frank, are you a full service auto shop, or?
Yes,
Okay.
Full service, specializing in European cars.
Yeah. So when we're doing the oil change only model, and you're just pumping cars out, then 2 bays is more than sufficient to do as many as, you know, a 60 vehicle day, if not more. I've personally done a 58 car day with one other employee at our Harrisburg location, and that's a 2 bay shop. I implore you just to actually, next time you drive around to a Jiffy Lube or a Valvoline, and especially some of the busier ones, how often you'll see them put a cone in front of that 3rd bay and only utilize 2 bays. And that typically, you know, Jiffy Lube does it for different reasons. They typically block off a bay for inspections or some of the other stuff that they're dipping their toes into. But from a functionality standpoint, it's actually easier to service the cars better with 2 bays, with where the UI UX of the equipment is, and the flow as well. And then also just from a staffing standpoint, running 3 bays, you know, you really got to have a lot of volume to really need to use 3 bays. And the way that the Quick Lube space is these days, there's just not many Quick Lubes that do 70 plus cars a day. And that would be the only way I would even consider doing a 3rd bay, is when you get to that point. And that's just not the trend of the business. And so what we're looking at is, how do we capture better margin? How do we keep that overhead smaller, so that when the intervals get wider and wider, whether it's due to, you know, higher performing vehicles or the emergence of electric vehicles, we want to remain profitable doing 20 cars a day or 15 cars a day. If you build a $1.5 million 6 bay castle looking Quick Lube, you got to be pumping out a lot of cars, or you have to change your entire business model in order to even just make your rent or mortgage. And so our main macro view is that the consumer wants a no frills oil change. And the only way to accomplish that in a way that doesn't lead to other services or just off the charts ticket average is by maintaining a lower overhead. And it typically starts with the cost of the building. And so, our buildings are prefabricated. So adding a third bay is a nominal, expense. It does increase. Usually to do a 3-bay, you need a minimum of a half acre. And there's just a lot of competition for half acre parcels because you're dealing with Popeyes and, all those guys that go for half acre lots. So by having that smaller footprint, we try to reduce the amount of competition for land as well. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. Does that answer your question, Frank?
It does. And I'm in a 12,000 square foot, 15-bay facility. So I completely understand it's a grind to have enough cars go through to cover those expenses. I think we're roughly 140,000 a month in expenses, not including cost of goods sold. So I understand that model very well. So good explanation. Thank you.
Yeah. And we like partnering with auto shops because right now, especially right now, and I don't know what your cost of oil is right now, but I'm assuming it's less than what I pay. It's more than what I pay due to just the economy of scale we have. And, most repair shops are not making money on oil changes today. And so a lot of them don't want to do it. And so if we can partner with a local shop and say, hey, send us all your oil changes, and we have eyes on 30, 40 cars a day, and we have eyes on them and we can send them to a partner. That's been a very fruitful relationship that we've done, because most your employees don't want to be doing oil changes. That's not what they want to be doing.
You are correct. I'm also a business coach, and we coach the value of the inspection. So the oil change, you're right. We don't, it's not a profit center for us. If I don't know, 20, 25 bucks, I might make in an oil change, but my average reporter is $1,200. So the long-term effect of servicing those cars has huge value. However, because of my volume, I can't get that guy in that says, hey man, can I get a quick oil change? I just can't get him in at all. And that's why I'm looking at this model. It ties up a bay and it puts somebody else aside. That's why I'm looking at a model like this, so I can accommodate the customers I've already reached, the customers I don't reach, and use it as a feeder, like you said, for the shop. And I'd like to be able to use it as a launching pad for new talent also. Great way to get somebody in the industry.
Yeah, a lot of our full-time guys, and inevitably there's usually a question about staffing, because that's a big concern this year and will be for the foreseeable future. The questions about staffing, we often are not a long-term career for the full-time employee. We do have management that is very happy with where they are. And so you just kind of have to figure out what people want. But you're exactly right. Like a lot of our full-timers, they just want to get their foot in the door with automotive. And we're more than happy to accommodate that because they serve a purpose. And our employees are a little bit more sticky than other industries than, say, food service, because they have an inherent enjoyment of automobiles and they have an interest in what they're doing. So even though it's a lower level labor, it's still a little bit more sticky than, say, a line cook who might leave Popeyes to go to KFC for a 25-cent raise. We don't have to deal with things like that. In fact, because we don't engage in high pressure upselling, we typically have a good time of taking employees from Take 5 or Valvoline, because they have usually performance-based incentive compensation. So I think that's actually a great idea. We utilize local community colleges to get people in the door with us, and then a lot of the times they do move on to dealerships or specialty shops, but it doesn't mean they don't serve a purpose at the time that we have them for that 9 to 12 months.
And if you're already partnering with, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time, if you're already in a position to partner with local repair shops, they might even participate in that program.
Yeah, I had not even considered that, and I'll reach out to some of our partners and some of our markets, because our managers have become friendly with all of those repair shops that we do business with. And so, but a lot of them are mom and pop shops where the owner is the operator and like his family members are the other employees. So there is one shop, our Dillsburg store, we partner with a Mavis Tire, which is a up and coming. They're not really up and coming anymore. They're established at this point, but that might be a good opportunity. So I appreciate that, Frank.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah,
great to meet you, by the way.
Good comment. Good comment. Mike, you're up next if you have a question. Good morning.
Hey, Costa.
Chicago.
Yeah, good morning from Chicago here.
Mm.
Are there particular competitive landscapes where this concept works best, or landscapes where it's not as successful or we're shying away from?
Yeah, so we're obviously in Chicago, which is a higher cost of living area. And so our employees in Chicago are compensated much higher than our Cleveland employees or our Pittsburgh employees. Not to say that you can't have success there, but to answer your question more pointedly, America as a whole is very car centric. We don't have great public transportation, but in areas that have at least minimal public transportation, you'd want to move a little bit away from that. So you're talking about Boston having the T and New York City and parts of Chicago, but you get crucified in Chicago if you refer to the burbs as Chicago. It's the one place that more so than any market I've ever been to, like if you say Des Plaines is Chicago, you'll be in trouble.
Yeah,
So,
if you call your
like
home prospect store Chicago, we'd give you
yeah,
shit for it for sure.
yeah. I learned that. Because we used to refer to the Mount Prospect store as the Chicago store, and people are like, no, don't do that. So, but those markets outside of the airports, those markets are really good for this. Most people in America have two working members, and they both have their own cars. And with kids going back to school in person, that's going to increase the mileage. And so I haven't seen a market that's like not feasible, right? Like this is just a car centric society. So the greater threat to this is more so the legislation that places like California are starting to enact. And even that, like there's such a runway and there's so many other factors that have to be addressed before that becomes a real threat. So ideally suburban areas where everybody's driving to work and driving to school, and just good visibility on the road. But just due to the nature of our car centric society, there's really no place you can go wrong with this model. Everyone values time more than ever now. If the pandemic did anything, it exacerbated people's need to like reclaim their time. And so the quick lube business was kind of before its time, because every startup that happens these days is about reducing the friction between the consumer and the end product or service. And so, I've used this example before on the call, but like, who would have ever thought, when Ray Kroc started doing McDonald's across the country and used to walk up and walk away with the food, and people were like, man, that's really fast. Well, then you drive up and you get your food. Man, that's really fast. And then you drive up and you say a number and then you get your food, and that's really fast. And now you order your food from your phone before you even get to the place. You drive into the parking lot, they throw the food through your window and you leave. Like that's even faster. And so, consumers really value that. And so one thing that 10x'd our business was when I doubled down on the message of selling people their time back. I cared less about brand. We've never partnered with a major oil company because I don't think the quick lube consumer cares about brand. And we doubled and tripled down on the message of selling people their time back. And that's when things really took off. And it wasn't so much about, quality or price. It was really when we started talking about time that things started to really grow. And that's what I think the future of most businesses are, including ours.
Great.
I can't relate to that more, Costa. This is Chris. I got an oil change on Saturday and it took over 2 hours. I couldn't
Where'd you
believe
go?
it. This Goodyear by the house.
Yeah, I mean, that's on you at this point, Chris.
I don't know where to take my car. We need to get some Costas open here.
Why didn't you go to Bedford?
I guess I could have driven to Bedford. Yeah, that's too far, man. We need one in my backyard.
I know.
Open here.
Yeah.
I want to open it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to that lady in Plano that wanted to give us the building.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting.
No, yeah, for all of you, Chris is an associate of mine, and he's helping us grow the brand here in the US. So, and he lives in Dallas, big market. Joe, you're up next. Do you have a question?
No, I think Sid would be next.
Oh, okay. On your screen's a little different. All right.
Oh yeah, actually, that's a good point, Michael. I don't know what's on your screen.
You want to go ahead, Sid?
I am good, actually. I'm just listening. I'm good. I don't have any questions yet.
Okay, good. Well, you and I had a call yesterday. Hopefully I did a good job so far.
Indeed. Thanks.
Joe, are you there?
Yes.
You have a question?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering if you guys collect any stats or just kind of intuitively know what kind of hit rate you have on getting a ground lease once you've identified an attractive prospect. How often those things kind of come to fruition.
I think we could get you that information, Joe, because we use a master broker for that. And it would be actually interested to look month over month for the LOIs versus lease signings, because things are beginning to soften up. And things have been softening up for a little while now, actually. And so I think we've come out of a really weird commercial real estate market where when I first started talking to landlords about this, especially at strip malls like Class B strip malls, they were tripping over themselves to give up, 1,500 square feet because their parking lots are empty now because of Instacart and things like that. And then all of a sudden we had this really hot commercial real estate market, and a lot of these landlords started getting FOMO, and they're like, oh, my next call might be from Chick-fil-A. I don't want to give you any space because what if they want the whole freaking thing? And then, I think most people realize that they're not getting Chick-fil-A or Starbucks. And so we've had a lot more success, and Morro Hill is a premier franchise, tenant only representation master broker. And so we're really lucky that they took us on as a client, and it really only came from the success of selling the franchises. So I don't have specific numbers for you, Joe, but I think we probably could get that from Morro Hill, because we track all of that incredibly closely, from the site visit to LOI to lease execution.
Got it. And when you have situations that don't work out, is it mostly the owner looking for other opportunities, or like you said, holding out for a big national brand, or is it more in the weeds of site planning and zoning and things like that?
It's twofold. It's typically us not doing a good job of conveying that the impact to the space is minimal. I think that is a part of it, because the landlords do have that concern about a building that they don't own being on their land for 15 years without an option to being able to purchase it. Morro Hill does the due diligence. We're not going to put, we're not going to try to find a site unless we think it's feasible in the first place. And they know the parameters. We've spent a lot of time with Morro Hill to make sure that we're not just like throwing darts in the dark. And so, we did have an incident come up where we got to LOI, we got a signed LOI, and then during the real estate due diligence, we found out that the plaza was half on a watershed that was like prohibited of any kind of petroleum use. And so there's also just a lot of misinformation out there about what we do, because we're not doing anything that has hazardous materials. And a lot of banks, a lot of properties think of gas stations when they think of motor oil, and they confuse us with properties that would have massive remediation. But at the end of the day, motor oil is a lubricant, and it's no different than the chapstick you put on your lips or the Vaseline you put on your baby's bum. And so it's just a different viscosity. And we've gone great lengths to like eliminate any types of objections to our building. So we keep in our new construction, we keep all the petroleum products above grade, because a lot of places have a confusion about below ground versus below grade. And we want to try to eliminate that. Some of the other reasons for saying no have been typically gatekeepers. There's not a lot of juice in these deals for brokers. So sometimes we find that we don't even get presented to the actual decision maker. And so when you're asking for a $1,200 ground lease and the broker is out there trying to get a $120,000 Rite Aid lease, who are they giving the priority to? Who are they giving their time and attention to? And so we've found that trying to bypass the decision makers, but there's a whole unwritten rules about that as well. You dive into that. And then the last thing is sometimes just bureaucracy. A lot of these plazas are owned by REITs, and there's just a whole bunch of people you got to deal with when you're dealing with that.
Right. Thank you. Sid, anything come up on your side?
No, I was thinking about the best place to start, right? So is it better to go with the parking lots, or should we have to go with an independent building or something of that sort? So I'm actually debating about either one of them. So I'm trying to understand what is the experience so far. Should we have to go the chaos, or should we go with an independent building?
Yeah, so there's really three ways to do it. And the path of least resistance is a conversion of an existing building. There's just not a lot of inventory of quick lube buildings, so that's very difficult to find it in a market that you want to be in. There are a lot more Jiffy Lubes becoming available because those franchisees are in their second renewal at this point. Jiffy Lube is a 20-year contract, and they started franchising in 1979. And so around 2020, a lot of these franchisees started getting out of the game because they don't like the multi-care, and they didn't sign up to be a Midas, a Meineke, or a Monroe. They signed up to be a Jiffy Lube. So we have seen a lot more of those buildings become available. And then, of course, what you referenced, Sid, is a green build is what they refer to it as. And there's usually a little bit more expense involved when you do a green build, because you have to pipe utilities, you have to deal with curbage, you have to deal with greenage, and the towns can give onerous requirements for that. They might say you have to plant 10 trees in order to get approval. And the parking lot, to us, a ground lease in the parking lot is the path of least resistance, because it's already got the utilities built out, whether it's because of the outlots or the parking lot lights. It's a small building. If you choose to go with our 1-bay, if it's a 2-bay, then it might be a little bit off to the side. We're working on a deal with Kroger right now to pilot some of their parking lots, because a lot of these grocery stores, their patronage is just like cut in half because of the Instacarts and Uber Eats. And so we were talking to Kroger, and their buildings that they built in the 1990s and 2000s were allocating almost 600 parking spots, and then they downsized it to 400. And then they told us they recently did a study that they really only need less than 300 parking spots. And so they're really aggressive with their outlots at the moment and trying to lease space. You'll see them in Meijer, another grocery store that's really aggressive with trying to offload some of their space, because there's just not that many people parking anymore. And so it's kind of become the path of least resistance to do a ground lease and put up a building.
So this new conversation that you are having with a Kroger or a Myers, is it to work with them directly to invest, or is it for the franchises? Those things are available.
With them, it's purely a landlord-tenant relationship. They have land that they are not using, and they want to lease it to us. And so we've got to pilot a couple stores first. It's most likely going to be in the Texas market. We'll be the first Kroger. And then if it's a good relationship, they'll open it up to the rest of their stores. We're also working with Walmart right now, because they're most likely going to be shutting down all of their auto shops because they're not making money on them. And so we've come to a tentative agreement with them that we'll pilot a store where they don't have a lube center, and then we'll pilot a store where they have shut down the lube center, and then we'll go from there. And so hopefully our first one in that will be in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, but there's still a lot of details to be hashed out there. None of it's set in stone yet. And when you're dealing with large companies like that, there is a lot of bureaucracy and waiting for people to return emails, and it can get frustrating. So sometimes it's really just easier to deal with independent owners. You know, one of our stores is on the parking lot of a gas station. It was an independent gas station, and the guy just had extra space on his lot and wanted extra money. And sometimes that's the easiest way to go about it.
I mean, what are the leasing numbers looks like between the independent or not a green building? I'm talking a separate, not a kiosk or just a building itself versus the kiosk. I mean, what are the numbers?
It's supermarket driven. What market are you in, Sid?
I'm in Bethlehem, and I'm also looking at Orlando.
Wait, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Orlando, Florida?
Yes.
That's quite a dichotomy. Yeah, I mean, somewhere like Bethlehem, PA, you know, obviously that's my backyard. We have leases in central Pennsylvania as low as $1,000 a month. Orlando would be obviously much higher because I don't think there's a hotter market than Florida right now. And so, you know, we were able to get a ground lease in Frisco, Texas for $48,000 a year. And that's a pretty hot market thanks to Jerry Jones buying up everything. And, you know, but in Charlotte, North Carolina, we've also seen ground leases for $60,000 and $70,000 a year. So it's very market driven.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sid.
Frank has
Yeah.
his hand raised.
I do, thank you. What is the ideal amount of space you need in a parking lot for 2 bays? All in.
For 2 bays, you know, the 2-bay building is only 800 and something square feet, so it's still not a lot of space, but it's more about the flow of the actual existing infrastructure. So I'm gonna do a share screen, and I'll put up a picture of our single bay because it best exemplifies how a 2-bay would not work in this space. And you know, honestly, people ask me a lot about the 2-bay versus 1-bay, and obviously all variables equal, we would prefer a 2-bay if all variables are equal. But if in a situation, you know, the only way the landlord will allow the use and it's a space that you really love is a 1-bay, then you know, that is a reason for using a 1-bay. So I'm just going to do this share screen real quick. All right, let me know if you guys can see this.
Yep.
Yes.
So a 2-bay would not work here because directly to the left of our building is a parking lot for a Burger King. And so that's not, you know, you couldn't go any more to the left. And then directly to the right of us is the flow of the strip mall parking lot. And so you have the one strip mall to the back, and then you have the Giant Eagle grocery store. And so if we had gone 2 bays over, there's no way that the landlord would have allowed this use because it just would have disrupted the flow of the existing infrastructure. This was minimally invasive. There's minimal curbage. There's minimal greenage. We tap right into the existing infrastructure. Very, very, very non-invasive to the property. And that's the whole point of this model, is we just want to remove as many barriers to objection as possible. Like, we want to approach these landlords and say, hey, there's no reason not to take us for, you know, $1,000 a month or $1,200 a month. This is a suburb of Cleveland. We pay $1,000 a month for this ground rent. And that, you know, that's the market of Cleveland though. So it's been an interesting time finding out, you know, where the growth is and the different market rates for these types of projects.
Yeah. I think I got a question from Sid yesterday, you know, the single, it is a small footprint, but with with a competitive lease like that, you can do really well cash flowing. I think Costa and I, we initially had made some estimates around how many vehicles we could pull through their day, 8-hour day. That's generally the schedule, 9 to 6. And we got, given what we've seen at that location and bay time, about 45 cars a day would be, pushing it. But
That
certainly
would be what I would consider the maximum before you reach that delta where the customer's experience starts to decline.
Yeah.
There definitely is a point where people don't want to be waiting too long. But one of the things that we're trying to achieve, and one of the reasons why we're franchising, is we want to scale fast enough to be able to grab the market and change the narrative and make people know, okay, this is oil change only. Because when you go to some of the more legacy brands that are now doing tires and brakes and tune-ups and all these other things, and you go on your lunch break and all of the bays are tied up with these other services, and you sit there for an hour and a half, then you think to yourself, well, what was the point? I could have made an appointment and then I wouldn't have lost my lunch break. And so if we can claim back that narrative of, even if you're the third car back, if you know that Costa Oil is only oil changes, you're not going to be concerned about being the third car back. Whereas nowadays, if you're the third car back of some of these other brands, you don't know what's in front of you. You don't know if it's someone getting tires. You don't know if it's someone getting brakes. You don't know if this is going to be a 2-hour, 3-hour endeavor. And so that's what we're trying to achieve. And by keeping the overhead, by minimizing the amount of SKUs, by minimizing the staffing requirements, we can have the same unit economics anyway and have the same take home, which really is what matters, is how much you take home. So, and then of course, if it is a good an option to do a 2-bay, then you do have that literally same unit economics as the other brands, or capability of unit economics, I should say.
Right.
How difficult it is to find employees in the markets nowadays?
Finding right now, things are getting a little bit better. It was really tough for a while. We have not had a ton of turnover internally. We have a good company culture, and so we have longer than industry average tenure for our full-timers, and definitely our managers. I have several managers that have been with me for 5+ years. And so, when you have that good, strong manager, that makes all the difference in the world. The full-timers, though, in the beginning of the quote unquote labor crisis, the bigger problem was having to compete with the Sheets and the Wawas of the world that are paying people $20 an hour to sit behind a cashier, a register. And so there is a point where it doesn't matter how enjoyable the job is, some people are just going to take the higher paying job. But that has since pretty much cooled off. And those companies have kind of moved to a more tenure based incentive. So you'll see Sheets will have a sign that says $18 an hour with a $500 signing bonus, but you got to stay 6 months before you get the bonus. And then even then it's amortized over several months. And so we haven't had a huge issue. Our whole labor cost has gone up because in order to bring people in to even get them to interview, we've had to move up base rates. And then when you have a guy that works for you for 4 years that started at $10 an hour and 4 years later is at $14 an hour, and then all of a sudden you have to interview someone with no experience right off the bat for $14 an hour, that doesn't sit well with the existing employees. And that's the conversation that kind of gets lost on the minimum wage debate, is the impact on the existing employees versus, it's not, this isn't done in a vacuum. It's not like you hire one person at $15 an hour and no one else is gonna then all of a sudden demand that. And so it's always interesting to hear the feedback from people who have never run a business, because they're like, oh, if you can't afford it, then you probably shouldn't be in business. It's no, it's not that simple. I'm sorry. There's wide ranging impacts to this. And so It's been difficult to get new people, and we've opened new stores, so we have had to go through that process, but our existing stores, we've done quite well of retaining the existing talent.
Thank you. Well, Costa, I think I speak to a lot of folks that have looked at retail or been in retail, and one of the foundational aspects of it is just doing oil change only. You don't have a large pool of employees, and like you said earlier, most of the folks that are in the business have some penchant, for it, either through a hobby, through past experience, and so it's more of a career for them per se than maybe opening up, a fast food restaurant where you've got high school kids and college kids that are doing it part-time. But I think it's a lot easier to manage. And what I've seen from one of your managers, Daryl, is he works very closely with Mark. I mean, those guys almost have become great friends, and I think that's a easier piece, at least from what I can see from my standpoint, than a manager, managing 3 shifts of 6 or 10 employees in each shift. So anyway, just a
Yeah,
comment.
the model does make labor a lot easier, and also more efficient. I mean, I think everybody's driven by one of the legacy oil change brands and have seen 5 guys standing around and 2 guys actually doing the work. So I think we've all experienced that.
Looks like we have about 8 minutes or so to go. Mike and Joe, any additional comments on your end?
Nothing further from me. It's been helpful. Appreciate it.
Great.
I don't want to open up a can of worms and drag this out, but an obvious question is the transition to EVs over time. I'm wondering, Costa, what kind of long-term modeling you guys have done, and where you might see how far out a plateauing or a declining in your kind of cars per day calculations.
Yeah. So this is a really nuanced conversation, and as you referenced, Joe, it could be a really long discussion. So I'll kind of give my high level thoughts on it. So there's a couple things here. Is the rate at which electric vehicles are penetrating in the market, as well as just the macro outlook for the quick lube industry. And so in my heart of heart, I believe that the model that gets left behind is going to be similar to what we're doing. And my hope and goal is that we're the ones that step in and fill that void and be able to do these vehicles with lower car counts and still be profitable. Because at the end of the day, we currently don't have the infrastructure to even handle 20% of the cars on the road being electric vehicles. And so there's 350 million internal combustion engine vehicles registered in the United States. 4% of them right now are electric vehicles. In other markets, it's higher, and it'll only get a little bit higher as the legislation causes the new sale of ICE vehicles. And then obviously the manufacturers themselves are buying into this as well. Ford is kind of tipping the dealership model on its head at the moment, and we'll see what happens from that. The problem with the current state of things is the grid doesn't have the capacity to handle everybody charging their vehicles at the same time. And as much as people think gas stations are going to be converted to charging stations, that's not a practical use for gas stations. It's also not a practical way for people to charge their cars. They're going to charge their cars the same way we all charge our phones at night. We get in bed, we lean over to the bureau and to the desk, and we plug our phone in at night. And that's how cars are going to be charged. So you're going to have a massive amount of vehicles being charged at the same time. And until we have an honest discussion about the safety and cleanliness of nuclear energy, it's a non-starter, because we just won't have the ability. I mean, it was laughable that 2 days after California announced the ban of internal combustion sales, they said, hey, by the way, don't charge your car because we might have rolling blackouts. And then on top of that, they're like, and put your AC to 78, which is just insanity in my opinion. And so the other side of this coin, and this is more data driven, is everybody on this call, their grandfather's owner's manual said how to change the timing of the valves. And then, and everybody on this call, their grandfather was more likely to be more hands-on, more mechanical. Then you go down a generation, it's a little bit less. And then you go down a generation and we get to the current workforce that is entering the workforce and getting a vehicle is the highest rate of do it for me. Our industry basically puts people into two categories. It's do it myself and do it for me. And so the level of people that are joining the do it for me actually outpaces the sale of vehicles. So our industry is actually in a state of growth because the whole industry is in the whole consumer base of people who are doing it is in a state of growth. And so just to give real numbers, if you were to cut the number of the internal combustion engine vehicles in half, it's about 170 million. And there are a lot of industries that are built on consumer bases less than that. And we currently would not be able to sustain 50% of the cars on the road being electric vehicles. And then the last thing I'll say, and this is a more alarming statistic than any statistic, it's right up there with student debt and credit card debt, but the average car loan is the highest it's ever been. And that impact has affected the average age of the car on the road. And so the cars on the road are staying on the road longer. The cars that are being manufactured today are better quality than ever. I remember when I was in high school, my dad was like, don't get in a Nissan Sentra. That's a death trap. And now Nissans make pretty quality cars. I mean, the Hyundais and Kias are really nice. And so these cars are lasting a really long time. And then on top of that, the loans are just amortized crazy now. I mean, when I financed my first car, the standard was 3 years, and then there was an option for 5, and it was like a newish thing. And they're like, yeah, you probably don't want to drag it out 5 years, but it's an option if you want to make your payment lower. Now they start you at 72, and I've seen 10-year auto loans, which is insane. That's absolutely insane. And these are depreciating assets that the minute they roll off the lot, they're worth less money. And so the maintenance of those vehicles create a runway for our industry as well. So that's kind of a holistic answer, Joe, but with also like a lot of shortcuts. We could definitely talk about this for a long time.
I appreciate that. Those are all good points. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So do we have 8-hour restrictions on opening the stores, or is it actually you can also open from 6 to 6 or something like that?
Yeah, we don't mandate the hours of operation. We actually don't have a lot of mandates. Like, even though we're a franchise system, I do believe that franchisees are business owners. So I give a lot of latitude for a lot of business operations. We obviously want to protect the brand standards, and I have my macro view of oil change only. So we're not going to allow things outside of that. And you do need written permission for certain other things. But we don't want to interfere with how you run your business. And so we don't mandate hours or pricing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then just to add, Costa, I think this has resonated with a lot of folks, is Costa doesn't mandate that you open on a Sunday. You would have the choice to do that, but he realizes there certain folks have certain things they want to do on a Sunday. So,
Right, you have another question?
Actually, I wanted to chime in on the electric car portion real quick, because I spent a lot of time in looking at that. If we went to all electric sales in 2035, let's assume across the board, roughly 17 million cars a year, maybe, because there's still a lot of adoption problems, range anxiety, infrastructure, lithium mines, and all that. So assuming 17 million cars a year were sold starting in 2035, The first year, we might hit 8% electric cars on the market, maybe. So we're still looking at a good, strong 20+ year model servicing internal combustion engines, number one. Number two, you really need to look at what's going on in the hydrogen fuel cell arena. We are going to end up in hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and Toyota, Cummins, Toyota and Yamaha are working on a V8 hydrogen engine. So that's a reciprocating piston hydrogen fuel cell engine, probably going to need lubrication. Cummins just is in the process of developing and testing a hydrogen fuel cell engine or hydrogen engine. So we are a far cry from tapping out with flying cars that don't need anything. There's still cooling system maintenance, 12-volt battery maintenance. There's filters for the cabin. There's filters for different things. There's cooling systems for the batteries. There's cooling systems for the electric motors. So there are still going to be a lot of service opportunities maintenance-wise for these vehicles. Not to mention there's brakes and tires and control arms and door handles, door latches, window regulators, window switches, blinker switches, and all the things that break on your car today will continue to break on the electric car. The only thing you're not going to have is an internally lubricated engine. So there's no fear from electric vehicles.
Yeah, and I believe in the entrepreneurial and innovative spirit of America. I believe in the people that, I think innovation will solve a lot of these problems. And so when people talk about range and they talk about things like that, I'm hesitant to jump on board with that, because very quickly, the smart people in our country who are working on those problems will figure out ways to resolve them. There's just a lot of other challenges. Hydrogen has been able to fly under the radar, and so it's not like no one's really talking about it. It was in the radar a little bit when the CEO of Nikola, the hydrogen truck company, got in some hot water, and people first started hearing about this other form. But I agree. I think that there's going to be a larger transition period than people think. I think people like to read headlines, and we base, that's just the way the media works these days, is they got to get clicks. And so I'm in full agreement with you, Frank.
It's gonna be a fun ride, actually.
Yeah. I was just wondering, Frank, do you have any in your general repair folks coming in with Teslas, having to replace batteries now? And what
we haven't had a battery request on a Tesla yet. We're just starting out. We've just bought the cables and the software to be able to scan the vehicles. That was for whatever reason, Tesla felt like you had to be a Tesla rocket scientist to be able to work on their cars. We do a lot of hybrid Toyotas, BMWs, and Mercedes. And we've done batteries on those. And there's a lot of battery options available out there for cars that a lot of people don't even know about. The first thing they do is call the dealer. Hey man, how much is a battery if I need one for this car? Yes. And especially if it's relatively new, there are no aftermarket choices. So, they're getting full retail. We've only made 6 of them price. And then we get sticker shock, and that's what makes the news.
Interesting. Yeah.
And Tesla does some weird stuff. They lock people out of their vehicles if they don't like what's been done to them. And there's a bunch of repair shops buying Teslas and tearing them apart and putting them back together just to understand better how to work on them, and then training other shops on how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just heard through some friends I have here that they were looking at replacing the battery on a Tesla, and I think the price they got from the dealer was $13,000.
Yeah, that's yep, very much true. Yeah,
wow.
But what people don't realize is that when you have a gasoline vehicle, you purchase your energy as you need it, right? I don't need gas unless I'm driving a car and going somewhere. Then I go get my gas. And so I buy my energy in very small increments. Electric vehicles, you have to pay for your energy storage. So it's really inexpensive to replace that storage, but it's very expensive to store that energy. So if that makes any sense. So it's really a mindset that we're not used to, because Costa nailed it, right? I want it, and I want it now, and I want it fast. I don't want to go to California and have to plan my trip for 3 stops for 30 to 40 minutes each to continue my trip. What am I going to do? Eat ice cream every, 2.5 hours to 3 hours? It doesn't make any sense. So people, they want it now and they want it fast. Currently, to be mainstream electric does not provide that. Now, if you're commuting, you're going back and forth to work 10, 15, 20 miles, it really is a perfect opportunity to come home, plug it in. I may not even need to plug it in every day.
Yeah. Great. I see we're 8:34 here. We've gone over a few minutes. Any quick last questions? Costa, do you have a couple more minutes or?
I've got to get running. We've got a
Okay.
busy week. But I appreciate everybody's time. It's always a fun conversation. So this was a really good one.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you all for being on the call with us. Joe, I think you and I are chatting later today. Frank, look forward to talking again. Sid, thanks. Chat to you soon.
Have a good one, guys.
All right. Thanks, Costa.
Thanks for your time this morning.